Fangs of Empire by Cunnison Steele. When mysterious death stalks the cattle ranges of Big Misty Basin, Wayne Morgan comes a-ridin', ready to match gun and fist with a crew of desperate killers and evil renegades. Chapter 1. Death on the Trail. Dave Shannon, riding slowly along the trail that wound through a rough section of Big Misty Basin from the town of Roaring Horse to his Big Crescent outfit, was low in spirit. He was getting old and he was lonely, and remorse was a dark weight inside him. He was alone in the world now, and had been for over 10 years, ever since a bitter quarrel with his wildling son Craig Shannon had driven the boy from the basin. The cause of the quarrel was hazy in his mind now. It didn't matter. What did matter was that his son had gone away in a wild rage, swearing never to return so long as his father lived, and Young a complete full-length masked rider novel. Follow a masked avenger of injustice, and Craig Shannon had kept that vow. He had not, in fact, even written. The weight of that old quarrel lay heavy on the wiry, gray-bearded rancher. It had stooped his thin shoulders and seamed his stern face. The responsibility, he now admitted, was his. Lost in his dreary thoughts, he did not sense the presence of the man crouched there on the cut bank above the trail. But the crouched man was avidly aware of old Dave Shannon, had in fact been waiting there for him for some time. There was a gun in his hand, and his eyes were cold, merciless, as he watched the oncoming rider. His voice, when he spoke, was low and sibilant, like the hiss of a snake. "Pull up, Shannon, and you'd better not make a crooked move." Although the rancher's mind was far away, he sensed the stark menace in that voice. He jerked his dun to a halt and lifted puzzled eyes, not able immediately to locate the spot where the voice had come from. "Get off your hoss, Shannon," the deadly voice ordered, "and come up here." Shannon peered upward at the rim of the cut bank. The late sun was in his eyes, but jutting over the rim, he could see the barrel of a six-shooter, and behind the gun, a shadowy figure. The salty oldster's hand inched toward his own gun. "You fool," the voice snarled. "Do you want to die?" "No, don't reckon I do," Shannon admitted, and moved his hand carefully back to the saddle horn. "But you're the fool, hombre. If you're meaning this for a hold-up, I've got no money on me." "Do like I said," ordered the man behind the gun. "Get off your hoss and climb up here." Shannon slowly dismounted. His senses were sharply alert now, his wildling son for the moment forgotten. That voice was oddly familiar, though there seemed something strange about it, too. Oddly familiar, something different. And there was something queer about the order to climb to the rim of the cut bank. Nevertheless, he started clambering slowly up the shaly slope. The cold eyes of the man behind the gun watched him warily. Then, as Shannon reached the rim, the gunman took 2 backward steps. Shannon straightened, staring straight at the man with the gun. Naked amazement leaped into his pale eyes. He should have recognized the voice. Why, he stammered. "What in all perdition you mean by this? Wouldn't surprise me none if it was some other hombres in this basin I could name. But you—" He broke off, trying desperately to dodge the gun barrel that the hold-up man swung suddenly and savagely at his head. But the gun barrel struck solidly just behind his left ear. Shannon staggered backward, tripped, tumbled headlong down the decline. He landed at the edge of the trail and rolled, stopping almost under the feet of his dun mount. The dun snorted, wheeled, and galloped wildly along the trail. Dave Shannon lay still, a trickle of blood running over one side of his bearded face. The killer clambered slowly down onto the trail, eyes wary and cruel, the gun still in hand. He stooped over the still figure. For a moment he knelt there, his hands fumbling over Dave Shannon's body. Then he straightened, almost panicky haste in his movements now, and clambered back to the rim of the cutbank. A moment later, there was a clatter of hoofs as he rode away from the spot. Dave Shannon was still as the earth on which he lay, there on the trail. It was just at sunset when a crescent puncher, Pete Barnes, homeward bound, found the body there at the edge of the trail. Shannon was stone dead. The puncher managed to catch Shannon's gun and lash the body to the saddle. If he hadn't been so excited, maybe he would have summoned Dr. Caleb Lee from Roaring Horse before touching the body, or at least headed for town with it. As it was, he headed for the Crescent with his dead boss, arriving there well after dark. His shout brought several punchers. His yaki parred on a grim trail of trouble. From the bunkhouse, at their head was wiry, bandy-legged old Jubilee Boone, the Crescent foreman. He had been with Dave Shannon for over a quarter of a century. "Who you got there, Pete?" Jubilee demanded. "Got the boss?" Pete stuttered. "Found him laying in the trail. I think he's dead." Consternation slammed at the punchers. They crowded about the two horses, firing questions at Pete. But he could tell them. "Reckon I was too plumb excited," Pete admitted. "Can't be helped now," Jubilee said soberly. "Lay hold, a couple you rannies, and take him inside." Gently they lifted Dave Shannon from the saddle, took him into the rambling old ranch house, and placed him on a bed. In the murky lamplight, the faces of the punchers were grim-set. Their eyes, especially those of walrus-mustached old Jubilee Boone, were shadowy with grief. Big gash on his head, a writer, Mutter Wayne Morgan. Nothing beyond the bare fact that he had found the oldster lying sprawled beside the trail, apparently dead. "I'll tear apart the murderin' skunk that done it." A waddy spat. "Never was a squarer hombre than Dave Shannon." "Take it slow," old Jubilee advised. "We don't know yet he was beefed. Maybe his horse throwed him. Pete, you should have fogged into town and brought Doc Lee to have a look-see before the body was moved." Ed: "Looks like a gun barrel done it. Reckon that's about right, too." "We'll let Doc Lee decide," Jubilee said. "Be best to have him come out here. Red, you go get him." A red-haired puncher turned and left the room. Within 2 hours, there was a clatter of buckboard wheels in the night outside. The vehicle drew to a halt before the ranch house. Steps were heard on the porch, and Dr. Caleb Lee bustled into the room carrying his black satchel. Doc Lee was well-known and well-liked all over the basin. He was a middle-aged man, stocky of body, and with square, good-natured features. Pale eyes peered from behind thick lens spectacles. The paunchy doctor had been a longtime friend of old Dave Shannon. Without speaking to the silent ranch hands, he strode to the bed and stooped over the still figure which lay there. His examination was brief, but thorough. Then he turned, peering at the men in the room. "Who found the body, and where?" he asked gently. Pete Barnes, the tow-headed puncher, stepped forward. "I found him," he said, "over close to Wolf Creek, where the trail dips between two cutbanks, layin' beside the trail. I brung him home." "Shouldn't have moved him," said Doc. "Not that it matters, I suppose, although Sheriff Sam Cruz will probably raise a howl. I tried to get hold of him before I started out here, but he was out of town. When he gets back, he'll want to make an investigation. Not that it's necessary. It seems pretty clear what happened." "You're the coroner, Doc," old Jubilee said grimly. "What caused Dave to die? That place on his head looks like it was made by a pistol barrel." "It could have been, of course," Doc Lee said slowly, "but it also could have been caused by several other things, such as tumbling down one of those cut banks onto the trail, or his head striking against a rock when his horse threw him. It doesn't matter so much, because that blow, whatever it was not sufficient to have caused his death." Murmurs of surprise filtered through the room. "If that lick didn't kill him, then what in Tunket did?" Jubilee demanded. "Dave Shannon," Doc Lee said slowly, "died from rattlesnake bite." "Rattlesnake bite? You loco, Doc? I don't see any sign of any." "Look!" Doc Lee had slit the dead man's right trouser leg, and now the punchers stared with bulging eyes at the rancher's leg. The limb was badly swollen. The swelling was worse just above the knee, where the staring punchers could see two tiny, purplish red dots side by side. There were many rattlers in Big Misty Basin, and at one time or another, most of the punchers had seen men who had been bitten by the deadly reptiles. Here, beyond doubt, was snakebite. "That's what killed Dave, not the blow on the head," Doc Lee said solemnly. "Reckon you're right," Jubilee admitted grimly. "But what was he doing off his horse? Cussed rattler wouldn't jump up and bite a man." Doc shook his head. "Maybe something was wrong with his saddle, and he'd got off to fix it, but that's not for me to say. All I can say is that he was bitten by a rattlesnake. Perhaps more will come to light when an examination is made of the spot where he was found. The rest is up to the sheriff." "That's two the danged rattlers have got lately," Pete said. "This city dude, Hartley, that was found last month over on the south part of Kemp Thor's place. He was bit in nearly the same place, just above the knee. Wasn't he?" "That's correct," Doc Lee said. "Greenhorns like Hartley have no business prowling through the rough country. Claimed he was hunting, didn't he?" "Dave Shannon wasn't a greenhorn," old Jubilee grunted. "He's practically bedded down with rattlers all his life." "Must have got careless," said Doc, soberly. "Most men do, at one time or another. Unfortunately, when you get careless with a rattler, it's usually the last time." The punchers shifted about uncertainly. They seemed dazed, bewildered by the sudden death of the man most of them had come to look upon as a father. Gloom was thick in the room. "Hadn't somebody ought to be notified?" one of them muttered. "Who?" asked another. "Far as I know, Dave didn't have any close relatives." "Except his boy, Craig," Jubilee muttered, frowning. "And he was just a kid when he left the basin 10 years ago. Ain't never been back. Him and Dave, they quarreled," Doc Lee said, as the Ulster paused. "It's never been any secret in the basin. The boy was wild, maybe more than wild, although that's not. The blasting force of the bullet slammed the raider from saddle, Chapter 4, for me to say. I do know, however, that especially of late years old, Dave bitterly regretted the quarrel that drove his boy away. He wanted Craig Shannon back home more than he wanted anything in the world. I also happen to know that in his will, he left everything he owned to the boy." "That's a fact," Jubilee agreed. "But don't nobody know where the young'un is. Even Dave didn't know." Doc Lee rubbed his square jaw thoughtfully. "I never mentioned it to Dave," he said, "but I've heard rumors several times that Craig Shannon was in Texas, that he'd straightened up and was doing all right. I wanted Dave and his boy to work out their own problems. Now it's too late. Anyway, I'll try to find Craig. I suppose it's better to come home late than never to come at all." For the first time, Doc's professional mask dropped, and there was grief in his pale eyes as he looked at the dead man. Chapter 2. Shotgun welcome. Thin. Mist lay like a shifting gray shroud over most of the basin. It made the ragged gunshots, which suddenly echoed through the darkness, all of the more sinister. One of the two blanket-covered figures who lay beside a dying campfire stirred, cast aside his blankets and sat up. He sat still as a stone, glossy head to one side, listening. The swift, staccato gunfire continued. The man the shots had awakened got quickly to his feet. He was an Indian, lithe, powerfully built, his magnificent copper body perfectly proportioned and muscular. He had been sleeping, but still wore his drill pants and white shirt, with a scarlet sash tied about his waist. Sheathed to the sash was a long-bladed, wicked-looking knife. His raven black hair fell almost to his shoulders and was held in place by a crimson bandeau girding his head. The Indian stepped quickly to the other blanket-covered figure, touched the man's shoulder gently with his hand. "Señor," he said huskily, calling his companion by the only name he had ever used for him during their years of riding the danger trails together. The man in the blankets stirred. "I'm not asleep, Blue Hawk," he said instantly. "I heard the shots." He flung aside his blankets, got to his feet, strapping about his lithe waist a pair of black-butted six-shooters as he rose. In many parts of the far-flung West, where he had rode, he was known as Wayne Morgan, and was a tall, powerful, blue-eyed man. He wore ordinary Levi's and a gray shirt that was open at his muscular throat. His features were rugged and brown, and his wide lips were always ready to grin good-naturedly, though they could become grim enough when occasion demanded. The campfire had been built beside a small stream, at the base of towering red cliffs. Bedrolls and other gear were scattered about the little clearing. In a small meadow nearby were picketed 4 horses, a pinto, a gray, a hammer-headed roan, and a magnificent black stallion. This Wayne Morgan and his companion, Blue Hawk, a Yaqui Indian, were inseparable. They had much in common, not the least of which was that both were indomitable, fearless fighters. Wayne Morgan was fast and deadly with the twin Colts he wore. Blue Hawk was equally dangerous with the rifle he carried in a saddle scabbard, or with the keen-bladed knife in his sash. Between these two was a deep bond of loyalty and affection. It was a bond that had been welded to steel-like hardness in the raging fires of uncounted battles for right and justice. "The shots have stopped, Señor," Blue Hawk said, after a moment more of listening. "Only a flurry," Morgan said, "but it didn't sound to me like a bunch of rannies letting off steam." "You think it means trouble, then?" asked the Yaqui. "Trouble for somebody." Morgan stared intently off to the south, as if trying to pierce the clammy mist with his keen, alert blue eyes. "Where would you say them shots came from, Hawk?" "About a mile away, Señor." The Yaqui's clear-cut accent was noticeable, for he had been educated in a mission school and spoke almost perfect English. "From close to the ranch buildings we saw off there when we made camp at sunset, I would say." "My idea exactly," Morgan went on to say. "It wasn't a big outfit, we noticed, but it looked well cared for. Usually, a well-run ranch means honest folks, and gunshots on the ranch of honest folks at midnight could mean only one thing: trouble." The Yaqui's black eyes gleamed with anticipation. "We investigate, then?" he asked softly. "Yes!" Morgan's voice was suddenly clipped, cold. "That's why we're here. Why we rode over 200 miles to look into rumors of trouble in this valley. Now it starts on the first night we head into the basin. Bring the horses, Hawk." "Yes, Señor," Blue Hawk wheeled, leaped like a dusky panther out of the circle of dim firelight, and ran toward the nearby meadow where the horses were picketed. Hastily, Wayne Morgan undid his bedroll and took from it a long, flowing black cloak, which he draped over his powerful shoulders. Over his eyes, he fastened a black domino mask, a black sombrero, and the pair of black-handled six-shooters completed his garb. Within the space of seconds, Wayne Morgan, drifting cowboy and top hand, had become the mysterious, black-garbed, masked rider. The famous Robin Hood outlaw of the danger trails, whose reckless courage and blazing guns had aided the oppressed and downtrodden over all the West. Wherever the wicked threatened the righteous, wherever free and honest men were threatened with bondage or death, there the dashing, reckless, masked rider and his Yaqui companion were apt to appear suddenly and unexpectedly. No other man in all the West was more beloved by some, more bitterly hated by others. Scores of conflicting stories were told about him. Some called him a saint because, without desire for thanks or reward, he had saved their property, their very lives. Others regarded him as a devil, a lawless renegade who killed and robbed without conscience. There was a fortune in bounty on his head. No man alive, however, except Blue Hawk, knew that the masked rider and the drifting cowboy, Wayne Morgan, were the same man. Not even the Yaqui knew the masked rider's real name, though, nor why he dedicated his life to the cause of right and justice throughout the West. All the Yaqui knew was that, although always speaking in the drawling idiom of the West, which he loved, the masked rider was a well-educated man. Blue Hawk also knew that the black-clad rider bore a bitter, implacable hatred for wickedness and injustice. Beyond that, he never spoke of his past. And that was enough for Blue Hawk, for the Yaqui was a kindred soul. He asked no more than to ride at the daring masked rider's side into whatever perils their crusades carried them. Almost before the masked rider had donned his garb, Blue Hawk led two saddled horses into the firelight. One of them was the wiry gray, the other the powerful, long-legged black stallion who was called Midnight. The masked rider leaped into the saddle of the stallion, and the black reared and pranced with expectation, knowing that whenever he was mounted by the daredevil masked figure, excitement invariably was close. Blue Hawk leaped atop the gray. With a quick thunder of hoofs, they raced away from the campsite. They threaded their way through a narrow break in the red walls, then plunged into a belt of timber, with low limbs slashing and mauling at them. But they rode swiftly through the timber, then were pounding across open prairie. They had heard no more gunshots in the night. The mist-shrouded basin seemed incredibly quiet, except for the rushing drum of their horses' hooves. The wind blew in irregular gusts, shifting the mist like a swaying curtain, and at times they rode across spaces where the moon shone with startling brightness through rifts in the fog. Even where the mist was thickest, the night was not black. The moon, shining through the mist, gave out a weird, ghostly gray half-light. For the last several days, Wayne Morgan and Blue Hawk had been riding toward this fertile, big misty basin, drawn by rumors of trouble, as Morgan had said. Thievery and murder, these rumors said, were rampant in the basin, and now these reports were easy to believe, even though the masked rider had not seen anything amiss, and had not heard anything more sinister than gunshots in the night. He was convinced that evil was afoot. They drove straight for the ranch buildings they had seen just before making camp at sunset that afternoon. The huge stallion was out in front, running with mighty, effortless bounds. Its rider's black cape billowing out behind him. The Yaquis' gray was close behind. Midnight swerved suddenly, avoiding a pole corral, and the ranch buildings rushed at them out of the mist. There were no lights in any of the structures, nor was there a sign of movement anywhere, and no sound at all. Instantly wary, the masked rider guided the stallion to the shelter of a barn wall nearby, followed by Blue Hawk. They sat there motionless in saddles, in the deep shadows, straining their eyes and ears. A horse kicked the side of a stable inside the barn. A loose board creaked in the wind somewhere. Otherwise, there was absolutely no sound. The log ranch house was as dark as the other buildings. Utter silence held the place, as did the mist, in its clammy grasp. Yet the masked rider had a feeling that the spread was not deserted. The very silence seemed weighted with something furtive and threatening. "What do you make of it, Hawk?" the masked man whispered. The Yaqui shrugged. "Maybe things are what they seem, senor. Maybe not. The shots came from near here. Of that I am sure. And men don't shoot, especially on a night like this, just to make a racket," agreed the masked rider. "Still, I'm not sure. Everything here's as peaceful as it seems." They tried to shake off the feeling that unseen eyes were staring at him from somewhere among the buildings, but the creepy feeling persisted. The masked rider had ridden the danger trails too long, with possible death the price of relaxed vigilance, to ignore his hunches. The silence, the appearance of desertion, struck a false note which he did not intend to ignore now. Suddenly, he swung to the ground, handed the stallion's reins to the Indian. "Wait here, Hawk," he whispered. "I aim to have a look-see. If anybody's at home, I'll rouse him." The Yaqui nodded, but said nothing. He never questioned the masked rider's orders, and the masked rider knew that always he could trust Blue Hawk to guard his back vigilantly. Without hesitation, the Robin Hood outlaw crossed the open space between the barn and ranch house. He crossed a narrow porch and paused before a closed door. Sharply, he rapped on the panels with his knuckles. As he stood there a moment before repeating the knock, that feeling of unseen peril was intensified. The board still creaked in the wind, but there was no other sound, inside or outside the house. Ropey tendrils of mist curled about the black-garbed figure on the porch. When silence persisted after his third knock on the door, he grasped the knob, turned it. The unlocked door gave inward to his pressure. He stood there an instant in the opening, before murky light from the match in his hand flared up. Then abruptly, the masked rider hurled his powerful body through the doorway in a cougar-like leap. A blasting roar rocked his eardrums, and twin funnels of flame spewed over his left shoulder, searing his face and neck. Acrid smoke bit at his nostrils. Those twin fangs of flame, he knew, had come from the muzzles of a double-barreled shotgun. His shoulder crashed into a lithe figure inside the house. The figure writhed away, slashing savagely downward with the shotgun barrel. The masked rider twisted aside, feeling the wind from the gun barrel on his face, heard its wicked thud as it smacked against the floor. He flung his arms about his antagonist's legs, heaved upward. The body slammed hard against the floor. The masked man bored in relentlessly, sinewy fingers snaking upward to fasten themselves about his adversary's throat. Then his lean body stiffened. Slowly his fingers fell away from the throat of the shotgun wielder. The body there on the floor lay still. With a growing conviction in his mind, the masked rider rolled aside, fumbling for another match. The match flared, lighting the narrow hallway murkily. Stunned, the masked rider stared down at the figure on the floor. It was that of a girl. A remarkably pretty girl, red-headed and slim-bodied, dressed in Levi's shirt and leather jacket. Chapter 3. Trouble Trail. Blood trickled slowly from a shallow gash on the girl's forehead. Evidently, it had been inflicted when her head struck the floor. It showed darkly against the pallor of her face. The double-barreled shotgun lay on the floor beside her, smoke still curling from its muzzles. Gingerly, the masked man shoved the murderous weapon aside with his toe. A light footstep sounded on the porch, and the masked rider whirled, guns in hand, but it was only Blue Hawk. "Are you all right, senor?" the Yaqui demanded anxiously. "The shot I heard, I wondered." "I'm all right, Hawk," the masked man assured him. "It's a girl who's hurt so far, but something's bad wrong here. You wait outside and cover me. I'll call if I need you." "Yes, senor," Blue Hawk murmured and faded back into the deeper shadows. The match winked out, but through an open doorway, the masked rider had glimpsed a white bed. Gently, he lifted the girl in his arms, groped his way through the shadows, and placed her on the white counterpane. Obviously, she was only stunned, for her breathing was regular. He scratched another match, applied it to a kerosene lamp on a table beside the stab-bodied man, leaped forward, jamming the fork of the stick just behind the head of the snake. Chapter 7. The Bed. His cold, alert eyes raked the room. It was evidently the girl's bedroom, white, neat, clean. It was connected with an adjoining room with a door which stood open. Quilts had been draped over the two windows. The Robin Hood outlaw's lips tightened. A dark ranch house, its windows shuttered or blanketed. A desperate young girl crouching alone in the darkness with a loaded shotgun in her hands. Suddenly, the masked rider tensed, whirled about, and again the black guns appeared in his hands with incredible speed. A low moan, freighted with pain, had come from the adjoining room. He stood for a moment peering into the shadowy room, but he could see nothing. The moan came again. Then, the lamp in one hand, the black-garbed man cat-footed through the doorway. He stopped just inside the doorway, staring warily. A wiry man with a gray mustache, his thin features drawn and harsh with pain, lay on a tumbled bed. Except for his shirt, which had been removed, the man was fully dressed. A red-stained bandage was plastered over one shoulder. He was trying desperately to get to his feet, a grimace of hatred pulling at his lips. "Cuss ya!" he croaked harshly. "Where's Jan? Where's my girl? I heard a shot. Where's my gun?" "Easy, amigo," the masked rider said gently. "Your girl's all right, and you won't need a gun." Hearing a noise behind him, the masked man turned and quickly went back into the room he had just left. The red-haired girl was sitting erect on the bed, staring about the room as though bewildered. Gradually, remembrance showed in her eyes as she stared at the masked rider. You murderer!" she flung at him. "What have you done to my father?" The masked rider holstered his gun. "Seems like your father's been shot, but I didn't do it. Look, girl, I don't aim to hurt you. What's happened here?" Without answering, the girl leapt from the bed and darted into the adjoining room. The black-clad man followed quickly with the lamp. There was a chance that she might have another shotgun cached there, but she was on her knees, gazing anxiously at her father, who glared with truculent fury up at the masked rider. "Wasn't satisfied with stealing the last of my critters, huh?" he growled bitterly. "Decided to come back and finish your work. Well, why don't you finish it?" "I haven't got any work to finish, At least not the way you mean, the tall man said quietly. I'm the masked rider. Both father and daughter stared at him, with first puzzlement and then gradual belief coming into their eyes. It was plain enough that they had heard of the masked rider, if they had never before seen him. The masked rider, whispered the wounded man. By gosh, I reckon you are, at that. You mean you weren't with the raiders who drove off our herd and shot Dad a little while ago? The girl asked swiftly. That's right. Now tell me what happened. First, let's get acquainted, masked rider, said the man on the bed. I'm Kemp Thor, and this is my daughter, Jan. This little 88 outfit belongs to me. The masked man acknowledged the introductions with a curt nod. Jan Thor, he saw, was no more than 18, and even prettier than he had thought at first sight of her. But his appreciation of her beauty would have to wait. For now that he knew evil was abroad in the night, impatience rode him hard. Now, what happened? He asked again. Kemp Thor swore thinly, futilely. The polecats drove off 100 head of prime stuff, he finally said. Nearly the last critter I had left on the place. Who did? Snapped the masked man impatiently. That's just what I don't know, growled Thor. The same ones that have been raising Cain in general for the last several months, I reckon. They've stole me blind. Not that I'm the only one that's lost, though I've been hit harder than anybody else. Twice, too, before tonight, somebody's tried to dry gulch me. The masked rider nodded, almost wearily. This was an old pattern, seen by him many times before. Always the same, differing only in small details. It was the endless fight between honesty and greed and evil. I'm about licked here, Kemp Thor went on dejectedly. For myself, I could stand it. But the women matters got so bad, I sent my wife, Jan's mother, she ain't so well, to visit her folks in Tucson 2 weeks ago. Jan insisted on staying here to help me. Well, I needed help. The last 2 to 3 days, we've been rounding up what cattle we had left, aiming to drive 'em to the loading chutes in Roaring Hoss, where there's a buyer waiting. Finished the roundup today, or I reckon it's yesterday now. Had the critters in a little pasture, a 1/4 mile over yonder, aiming to start the drive at dawn. I was afraid something might happen, so I was standing night guard over the herd. A little while ago, 4 or 5 riders suddenly showed up out of the mist and opened up on me without warning. I got in a few shots, but a bullet knocked me out of the saddle. The snakes drove off the herd, leaving me there on the ground for dead. Jan heard the shots and come on the run. She managed to get me back into the saddle and to the house, where she patched me up just about the best way she could. I thought maybe the raiders would come back to kill us both. Jan Thor took up the story. That's why I was waiting there in the hall with the shotgun. I'm sorry I almost killed you, masked rider. I thought you were one of them. Forget it, clipped the masked man. You're sure, Thor? You didn't recognize any of the raiders? It all happened quick, and besides, I couldn't see good in the mist. But there might be one clue. One of the raiders, he seemed to be the leader, rode a blaze-faced hoss with 3 white-stockinged feet. Dad, the girl said sharply, you didn't mention that before. Didn't have time, Thor muttered. What kind of clue is that? The masked rider asked quickly. You know somebody who owns a hoss like that? Anybody might own a horse with white-stockinged feet, Jan said swiftly. It doesn't mean anything. The Robin Hood outlaw looked at Jan Thor shrewdly. Her face was taut, pale, her eyes defiant. She was, he saw, highly agitated. Who owns that kind of hoss? He asked grimly. Young hombre, by the name of Court Lash, Kemp Thor said, with seeming reluctance. He owns an outfit over north of Peace, on the edge of the hills. So far as I know, he's the only man in the whole basin who does own a mount like it. Is this Court Lash supposed to be honest? Asked the black-clad man. That's a matter of opinion. Kemp Thor shrugged. Court's father was old Black Sam Lash, an outlaw and a hoss thief. Black Sam Lash was strung up by a rancher's posse 10 years ago for rustling, when Court was just a button. Folks swore that Court had his pa's black blood in him, that he was bound to be snaky like his pap. Me? I don't know. There's no proof Court Lash is anything but square and honest, Yan Thor said fiercely. Folks shun him and lie about him because his father was a rustler, but that doesn't make Court one. I think he's... Her voice gradually died away. Her eyes were flashing, her face flushed. This girl, the masked rider had already decided, was in love with Court Lash, the outlaw's son. Kemp Thor was looking at his daughter curiously. You got no call to defend him, girl, he muttered. I'm just telling what I saw tonight. One of the raiders was forking a hoss like Court Lash's white-stocking bay. You know well enough, there's been talk he's behind all the cussedness that's been going on in the basin. There's been talk about others too, Jan flared. Bill Quady, for instance. What about him? Who and what is Bill Quady? The masked rider demanded. Quady owns the Cross T outfit, the wounded rancher explained. He's an unsociable cuss, a hard drinker, and gambler. Fights a lot. Bill Quady's been accused of a lot of things, but nothing's ever been proved. I don't know about Quady either. Talk, but that's all I know. The masked rider was quiet a moment, his keen, analytical mind placing in its proper place what he had just heard. Maybe he had something concrete to go on. Maybe not. Only time would tell. But admittedly, not many horses such as Thor had described would be found in one locality. When did all this start? He asked. 5-6 months ago, Kemp Thor told him, just a little while after old Dave Shannon died, and his boy, Craig Shannon, came back to take charge of the Crescent outfit. Dave was bit by a rattler on the trail between his place and town, dead when one of his punchers found him. Dave left everything to his boy Craig. The young'un had been gone for 10 years, ever since him and his pa had a quarrel over the boy's wildness. Doc Lee found the button, only he's about 28 now, in Texas. You say Dave Shannon and his son had quarreled because of the boy's wildness? Repeated the masked rider. Is this Craig Shannon still wild? I don't like him, Jan Thor declared, tossing her red head. I wish he'd stay away from here. Craig Shannon has took a shine to my girl? The wounded man chuckled, then grimaced with pain. Not that I blame him. Craig, so far as I can judge, is ace-high, quick-tempered maybe, and a mite rough. But that's to be expected. If you mean, do I think he's got anything to do with what's been happening? I don't. He's well fixed as it is. The Crescent is a big outfit. Looks queer. An old-timer like Dave Shannon getting bit by a rattler, the black-garbed man murmured, a skeptical look in his eyes. Yeah, it did, acknowledged the rancher. But there's lots of rattlers in Big Misty. Hadn't been but a month before Dave Shannon died, when one of the critters got another gent, fella named Hartley, right here on my range. Hartley was a kind of greenhorn, been prowling about the hills for a couple weeks, camping and hunting. Claimed he was in bad health. Well, he sure was when they found him one day. A rattler had bit him, and his leg was swelled big as a keg. The masked rider had been sitting in a chair beside the bed. Now, impatient for action, he got to his feet. Reckon tonight's raid'll about finish you, won't it? He asked casually. I'm licked, Kemp Thor said bitterly. With the money from them 100 head, I aim to pay off the bank. Now I can't do it. "Maybe you can," the masked man encouraged him. "You know which way they drove the herd? South toward the hills, like they always do. Once they cross the river and get into the rough country beyond, they're hard to trail. Likely they cross the hills and scatter down onto the Cold Creek Range." "What you aimin' to do, Masked Rider?" The tall, black-clad man shrugged. "Quien sabe?" he murmured, turned, and went quickly into the night. Blue Hawk was waiting for him with the horses, in the deep shadows of the barn wall, rifle in hand. He grunted with relief as the masked rider strode toward him. "Work for us, senor?" the Yaqui asked, as the masked rider swung into the saddle. "Yes, Hawk," the masked man said grimly. "Right now, we've got a stolen herd to get back, and that's only a beginning. I'll tell you about it as we ride." Blue Hawk nodded, swung the gray in beside the masked rider as he whirled the great stallion and headed to the west, toward the nearby pasture where Kemp Thor had been holding the last of his cattle. On the face of it, this was more than just a simple case of rustling. For to the masked man, it was evident that a deliberate plot was afoot to ruin Kemp Thor, even kill him. Chapter 4. Death in the fog he missed had thinned somewhat, with the moon spearing its silvery shafts through the rifts, so the masked rider and Blue Hawk had little trouble in locating the trail of the stolen herd as it straggled southward across the plain. They followed the trail, the masked rider explaining what he had learned to Blue Hawk as they rode. "You think the Senor Court Lash might be the rustler boss?" the Indian asked as his companion finished. "I'll not pass judgment till I see Lash, and the same goes for Bill Quady too," declared the Robin Hood rider. "We know from experience, Hawk, that things ain't always what they seem. Honest men sometimes look like they're thieves. Thieves seem to be honest men. But I do know that something bad is happening here, and I aim to clear it up." The Yaqui nodded silent agreement. He knew that when the masked rider used that tone, somebody was in for trouble, and he knew that once the masked man had taken a trail, he was as relentless as a wolfhound until its end was reached, until justice had been meted out to those he was fighting. They followed the trail at a steady pace straight southward. At times, it was plainly visible in the moonlight. At others, as the mist closed in, it was almost invisible. At times, as the fog lifted, they could see a ragged line of purple hills jutting against the southern horizon. 4 riders, they knew by now, were driving the stolen herd. Miles slid under the thudding hooves of the black and the gray. An hour passed, 2 hours. Obviously, they were gaining on the slow-trailing herd. Now dawn was close. Occasionally, they could see the rough, timbered slopes rising darkly before them. Suddenly, dawn was in the east. Gradually, as the wolf-gray light grew, the range of their vision increased. The chill, damp mist curled snakily about them. "Look, senor," the Yaqui suddenly cried out. "The herd!" Sure enough, there was the stolen herd, trailing slowly along through the fog 200 yards ahead. There were, as the masked rider had known there would be, 4 raiders with the cattle. 1 rode point, 1 drag. The others were on the flanks. They had not as yet seen their pursuers. The masked rider swerved midnight, followed by Blue Hawk, and gained the shelter of a line of jack pines. Just ahead of the herd, he saw, the mist became thicker, boiling upward as if churned by a strong wind. And even if he had not heard the muted roar of the water, he would have known that here was Roaring River, which laced the basin and skirted the hills at this point. And once across the river, Kemp Thor had said, the chase would be hopeless. The masked rider could see a break in the gleaming black walls ahead. He guessed that there must be a shallow ford here, where the rustlers pushed their stolen cattle across. He made a quick decision, as he always did, and once committed to action, he never hesitated. "We've got to hit 'em before they reach the river," he said swiftly to Blue Hawk. "I'll circle and come in at an angle. You come in from behind. Give me a little time." "Yes, senor, I will be ready." Still keeping to the line of jack pines, the masked rider spurred ahead. He could hear the unsuspecting raiders whooping and slashing at the cattle with ropes, forcing them on toward the river. The masked man almost passed the herd. Then, as the river blocked his path, he swerved the big stallion again and turned page. Many never suspect cause of backaches. This old treatment often brings happy relief. Many sufferers relieve nagging backache quickly, once they discover that the real cause of their trouble may be tired kidneys. The kidneys are nature's chief way of taking this excess acids and waste out of the blood. They help most people pass about 3 pints a day. When disorder of kidney function permits poisonous matter to remain in your blood, it may cause nagging backache, rheumatic pains, leg pains, loss of pep and energy, getting up nights, swelling, puffiness under the eyes, headaches, and dizziness. Frequent or scanty passages with smarting and burning sometimes shows there is something wrong with your kidneys or bladder. Don't wait. Ask your druggist for Doan's pills, a stimulant diuretic used successfully by millions for over 50 years. Doan's give happy relief and will help the 15 miles of kidney tubes flush out poisonous waste from your blood. Get Doan's pills. Advi rode suddenly out of the thicket. The swingman, a burly, hawk-faced fellow, saw him first and jerked his mount back on its haunches. He stared a moment, his mouth gaping, as if he thought he was looking at a black-clad demon of the fog that was bearing down upon him. Then the swingman shouted a sudden, harsh warning to the others. From the right flank, a lanky, buck-toothed raider spurred forward, hand on gun butt. The other flank man, a swarthy, cruel-eyed breed, stared at the masked rider over the backs of the cattle. Momentarily, the drag man was hidden by the swirling fog. When the masked man had approached to within 100 feet, the burly swingman shouted a harsh warning. "Just a minute, amigo. What's your business here?" "Watch it, Jake," bawled the lanky rustler. "That's the masked rider, and he's plumb pison." Ignoring the flat warning, the masked rider rode silently on, features grim, the blue eyes behind his domino mask bleak and implacable. This was an old game with him, matching speed and wits and cold nerve with the lawless. Old, yet always new, luring him always to new adventures. 10 yards from the blocky raider, he halted. The rustler sat with his weight on his right leg, right hip forward, a calculating gleam in his evil eyes as he stared at the black-garbed rider. The lanky outlaw was still coming forward. The masked rider gestured abruptly toward the cattle. "Where you headed with that herd?" he demanded to know. "That's our business," snarled the squat outlaw. "If you've got good sense, masked rider, you won't stick your nose into our business." "Them cattle are wearing the 88 brand, barked the black-clad man. "I'm Kemp Thor's friend. I'm taking over the herd. You got gall, trying to rustle our herd right out from under our noses. Why, blast you, I got a good mind to salivate you." "Ride out, or grab your gun," the masked man said coldly. The blocky raider cursed wickedly, grabbed for his gun. A shot crashed above the low bawling of the cattle. At 10 yards, the blasting force of the .45 bullet slammed the raider from the saddle. His mount wheeled and galloped wildly away, stirrups flapping. But the raider wasn't dead. He rolled over, reared to his knees, trying desperately to raise his gun. But he couldn't do it. He swayed there an instant, like a man praying, then fell slowly forward on his face. Warned by a sudden pounding of hoofs, the masked rider whirled, twisting aside in his saddle. A gun roared almost in his face. The startled stallion reared, flailing the air with its front hoofs. The masked rider stared downward into the thin, ferret-like face of the lanky rider, a face from which glared a pair of yellowish, hate-filled eyes. The raider swept on past him, dragged his mount to a halt, spun around, and lifted his gun again. The gun spewed lead and flame, and the masked man felt the hot breath of the bullet as it snapped viciously past his ear. Vaguely, he was aware of the booming crash of a rifle somewhere behind him, and knew that Blue Hawk was in the fight. From the corner of his eye, he saw the swarthy breed spurring his mount through the cattle, gun in hand. But the breed was still 50 yards away, and the milling cattle were holding him back. Now the masked man's attention was riveted on the lanky killer. He writhed desperately aside in his saddle, his twin guns flashing up, and their thunder echoed like drums among the walls. The lanky man dropped his gun, clawed at his chest. With a snarl still curling his lips back from his buck teeth, he tumbled stiffly to the ground. Blue Hawk came racing up out of the fog from toward the drag, rifle upflung, anxiety on his coppery face. He had been delayed by the cattle, as well as by his short, savage battle with the dragman. The masked rider whirled again toward where he had last seen the breed. But the breed, seeing the fate of his companions, had quit cold. He was spurring wildly, frantically, back through the cattle. The masked man raised his black guns, then lowered them. He couldn't shoot even a rustler and a killer in the back. The breed reached the edge of the cattle, flinging a bitter look of fear over his shoulder, then vanished abruptly into the swirling fog. "Shall I pursue him, Señor?" Blue Hawk asked eagerly. "No, let him go. What about the dragman?" "Dead, Señor." "Then that makes 3 we got. What kind of a hoss was he riding?" "A buckskin. There was none with a blazed face and 3 white stockings." "No." The masked man nodded. "That may mean nothing. That hombre could have dropped out after making the raid." "What now, Señor?" asked Blue Hawk. "We'll trail this herd back to the 88, the masked rider decided. "Afterward, well, Kemp Thor won't be able to ride for some time, and the Thor girl will need help in getting these cattle to Roaring Hoss. Wayne Morgan will have to help her do that. And after that, there'll still be work to do. These hombres were likely only small fry carrying out orders from their boss or bosses. We've got to find out who's given them orders. We'll bury these Jaspers right here, then head back for the 88. In not much more than half an hour, they had the herd turned and headed back across the basin toward the 88 outfit. By now, the mist was rapidly disappearing. By mid-morning, it was gone. They drove the herd onto Kemp Thor's 88 outfit at mid-morning and left the beefs in the same pasture from which they had been stolen the night before. Jan Thor came galloping up on a spotted pony before they could leave. She stared wonderingly at the cattle and was almost tearful in her thanks. "Better get 'em to a buyer as soon as possible," the masked rider advised, cutting short her thanks. "Best wait until tomorrow, though, for they need water and rest now. I don't think they'll be bothered again tonight." I'll do the best I can," said Jan, "though it'll be a pretty big job. alone. Father won't be able to ride for several days, I'm afraid. The masked man pretended deep thought. I aim to be busy on another job myself, he finally said, but I know a gent who might help you, a drifting cowboy named Wayne Morgan. I'll see if I can get in touch with him, and if I can, I'll send him to you early tomorrow. If you only could, Jan cried eagerly, and I can't thank you enough. The masked rider lifted his hand in a parting salute, and he and Blue Hawk rode away. It was not a great while before they dismounted at their camp beside the little stream a mile north of the 88 ranch buildings. Chapter 5. Lady Boss. As Morgan called, Jan came out onto the porch and stood in the early morning chill. She regarded the big, smiling cowboy with calm, appraising eyes. "Are you Wayne Morgan?" she asked before he could speak. "That's right, ma'am." He bowed, hat in hand. "Just a rolling stone, not one to gather any moss. I heard you might have a job for me." "That's right, I have," she told him, "although it maybe won't last longer than just today." "That's long enough on any one job, I'd say." His grin broadened. "I'm ready to roll any time you say." The girl smiled suddenly, obviously favorably impressed with Morgan. She gestured with a small, tanned hand. "I'll be ready to roll with you in just a few minutes," she said. "I was just starting to eat. Have you had breakfast?" "Yeah, I have. But that coffee sure smells good." "Get down then. There's plenty." Morgan dismounted and went inside with Jan Thor. He enjoyed the strong black coffee, but his main reason for entering was to find out how Kemp Thor was progressing. Jan introduced him to her father, but offered no explanation for his being wounded. The rancher's shoulder was obviously sore and stiff, but he looked remarkably fit, all things considered. "Them cattle's mighty important to me, Morgan," Thor said bluntly, as Morgan and the girl prepared to leave after they had talked for a while. "If the masked rider sent you here, he maybe mentioned what happened night before last." "He said something about the herd being stole once," Morgan said casually. "The masked rider got it back, didn't he?" "He sure did," Thor said with enthusiasm. "I never did believe the yarns I heard about him being a crook and killer. And now I know they was lies. He's a friend to some hombres." "To any honest hombre that needs help," the tall cowboy said quietly. "I know him, you see? And don't worry, Mr. Thor. We'll try to see that that herd ain't spooked again." He and Jan Thor moved outside into the early morning air. The sun was up now, fighting to get through the mist. Jan Thor, dressed in Levi's shirt and boots, went to the barn and saddled her palomino. In short order, then they had the herd rolling toward Roaring Horse. It was immediately plain to the ranch-bred girl that Wayne Morgan was a top hand. She watched him admiringly as he trailed the herd with expert ease. They talked little. There were questions he would have liked to ask Jan, now that he was alone with her, especially about Court Lash. But this he couldn't do without revealing his identity as the masked rider, or at least revealing that he was in intimate touch with the black-clad man. And that, of course, would not be advisable. They reached Roaring Horse at noon and drove the herd straight into the loading pens near the railway station. The buyer, who was representing a Denver syndicate, was waiting, and he gave Jan Thor a check for the cattle on the spot. $2,500, Jan exclaimed to Wayne Morgan, sighing with relief. "Enough to pay the bank, with $500 left over." "Reckon it's a comfortable feeling," Morgan said, smiling. "You don't know how comfortable," Jan told him eagerly. "You'll have to go to the bank to get your pay, Morgan, so you might as well watch me pay off Stone Heath. It'll be a pleasure, too, because I think he had an idea he might get the 88 spread." "Who's this Stone Heath?" asked the cowboy. The bank president. I don't like him. He's foreclosed on several outfits when he didn't have to. Well, let's go." Morgan was not overlooking any bets, and now he suddenly wanted to meet the bank president, Stone Heath. He walked with Jan along the plank walk, turning with her into the town's most imposing building, a 2-story brick structure. Inside, after looking quickly about, John asked for Stone Heath. "In his office," the fat cashier grunted. At the back of the bank was a closed door. Jan tapped on the door. "All right. What is it?" a gruff voice said. Jan Thor pushed open the door, and she and Morgan went into the small, meagerly furnished room. Stone Heath sat behind a flat-top desk that was littered with papers. He was a big, thick-bodied man, perhaps middle-aged. His heavy face was stern, his eyes cold, calculating, his mouth like a steel trap. He glanced briefly at Wayne Morgan, getting heavily to his feet, his hooded gaze returning to the girl. "Why, good morning, Miss Thor." His cordiality seemed forced. "What can I do for you?" Without ceremony, John Thor tossed the check onto the desk. "I want to pay the $2,000 Father owes you," she said crisply, "and I want the remainder, in cash." Stone Heath picked up the check and looked at it. Morgan, watching closely, saw the banker's thin lips tighten. When he looked up, disappointment was plain in his cold eyes. "Why, certainly, Jan," he said. "I see. You must have sold your cattle? Why didn't Kemp bring this in himself?" "Because he didn't feel like it." The girl made no effort to hide her dislike for Heath. "The check's good, isn't it?" "Of course it's good," said the banker suavely. "I suppose your father had his reasons for not coming in. I'll get the note and mortgage." A cunning man, Wayne Morgan decided. A greedy, grasping, ruthless man, and filed the knowledge away in his brain for future reference. When the mortgage business had been transacted, they said brief good mornings to the banker, and Wayne Morgan left the bank with Jan Thor. He walked along the street with her to where she had left her palomino. She had stated her intention of returning to the ranch immediately. "You sure you don't have any more work for me?" Morgan asked. She smiled, shook her red head. "There won't be much to work with on the 88 for a while now," she said. "But you're welcome to drop by any time, Morgan. And maybe later there'll be something. Thanks for helping me." He lifted his hat, watching as she swung into saddle and rode slowly along the street. As plucky as she was pretty, he decided, and that was saying plenty. As Jan Thor reached the lower end of the street, another rider entered it. Watching, Morgan saw the two horses slacken their paces, then stop altogether, the two riders facing each other. They were too far away for him to hear their voices, but he could tell they were talking. Suddenly, his interest was riveted on the horse the man who had just entered the town was riding. It was a rangy bay, and it had a blazed face and 3 white-stockinged feet. Here, then, he reasoned, was Court Lash. But he was too far away to tell much about the man's appearance or to judge him by it. The riders he watched talked only a moment or so. Then the girl rode on out of town, and Court Lash rode along the street. His back against a hitch post, Morgan studied the rider shrewdly. Court Lash was a slender, dark, handsome young fellow, little more than a boy. Leashed power was evident in his lithe body, and there was a cynical quirk to his lips, a bitter recklessness in his dark eyes. There also was a hint of arrogance, of insolence, and deviltry about him. As he rode past, the young rider's eyes flicked briefly, almost contemptuously at Morgan. Morgan continued to watch as he rode along the street, dismounted before a saloon, and went inside. Wayne Morgan stood a moment longer, looking thoughtfully at the bay with the white-stockinged feet. He was uncertain of his next move. He didn't know yet just what he was up against. Was it a case of just plain rustling and thievery, or something more sinister? Why had the raiders singled out Kemp Thor for ruin and death? There were many others in the basin with bigger, richer spreads. He went along the street and entered a general merchandise store where he purchased a few supplies he and Blue Hawk had been needing. Afterward, he strolled along the street and entered the same saloon he had seen Court Lash go into. Young Lash stood at the bar, alone, a bottle and glass before him. Morgan crossed to the bar, taking up a position several feet from Lash, and ordered rye. He seldom drank, but sometimes the pretense of drinking came in handy. Now he wanted to study the outlaw's son carefully. Several other men were in the saloon, drinking and playing poker, but what scant attention they paid to Court Lash was not friendly. Obviously, the outlaw's son was aware of their hostility, for his own eyes were contemptuous and insolent as he stared about the room. There was something cynical and a little wild in the way he smiled at them all. Suddenly, the bat wings were pushed open and two more men entered the barroom. One of them was a tall, blond fellow with heavy shoulders and hawkish features. He wore a flat-crowned white hat, and a silver-handled six-shooter was thonged to his thigh. The man with him was tow-headed, blocky, and had a scar on one cheek. The big man glanced quickly about the room, his gaze riveted almost instantly on Court Lash. He strode across the room, stopping close to the dark-faced youngster. Lash seemed unaware of him until he spoke. "Lash, I've been wanting to see you," the big yellow-haired man said flatly. "I want to talk to you." Court Lash turned slowly to face the speaker. He was still grinning that faint, malicious grin. "You see me, Shannon?" he drawled. "Start talking." The room had suddenly become deadly quiet. Wayne Morgan looked with sharp interest at the thick-shouldered man. Here, he knew now, was Craig Shannon, son of old Dave Shannon, who had died from rattlesnake bite. The man's tow-headed companion probably was one of his crescent riders. "What did you crave to talk about, Shannon?" Lash repeated. "Maybe 2, 3 things, hombre. First off, you ain't got any too good a reputation in these parts, considering your pa was hanged for rustlin'. It don't do folks any good, especially girls, to be seen talking to you, like out there in the street a few minutes ago." Court Lash's face had gone pale and taut, and ridges stood out along his lean jaws. It was obvious to Wayne Morgan that the young man was making a mighty effort to control his temper. When Lash spoke, his voice was calm, derisive. "Your personal property, Shannon?" he drawled. Maybe not," Shannon rapped. "Just stay away from her. Another thing, on several occasions lately, I've lost small bunches of cattle. And I reckon you expect me to cry about that? No, I just expect you to let my cattle alone. Once a couple of my riders got close enough to the rustlers to see 'em, to see that one of the raiders was forking a bronc with a blazed face and 3 white stockings." "You accusing me of rustlin'?" Lash said, tightly now. "If it smells like your rotten meat, hombre, eat it." "Shannon," Court Lash said slowly, "you're a low-down, black-hearted liar." Chapter 6.